Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage International Carwash Association CEO Eric Wulf.
What we're going to talk about today is the state of the car wash industry. Last year, if you were with us, you might recall this presentation, titled the same, took a real deep dive into our consumer research and our industry research, ICA produced predominantly. This year, we're going to take a bit of a shift. We're going to take the consumer, the ICA stuff, we're going to park that in November at our event called Roadmap, coming up the first week of November in Dallas. We'll do the deep dive then. What we're going to do today is zoom out a little bit and look at all of the different sources of data that there are in this industry, and then we're going to process that with a great panel that I'll introduce in a couple of minutes, help us uncover, get their perspectives on that data. And then the third is we will have time at the end we'll reserve for questions and answers. So we'll have mic runners that get around. I'll give you a reminder. All you have to do is raise your hand and we'll get those questions to the panel. Okay, so what I want to highlight for you is on some of the slides that follow, here's all the sources I'm using for the data today. Now, I want you to know that this is not an exclusive list. In fact, it's interesting to me that the car wash industry for years and years, when I started certainly, was much more opaque than today. Getting any data was really hard. I'd argue that the challenge now is not finding data, it might be parsing through it, getting access to it, and maybe most importantly, taking all these disparate data sources and putting together the story that you can use to build your strategy and inform what you do with your business. So there's lots of stuff out there. I'm going to use these. Again, not an exhaustive list. I'm not recommending you only use these, right? The only thing I think I would recommend you do if you're entering the business or even in it is just remain inquisitive. Keep digging for information to use it to inform your decisions. Okay, so as we go through this, I'm going to start this with the concept of headlines and then stories. So there's three headlines I'd like to start this morning with. Now, if you were here last year, if you've been in the business, some of these will be familiar to you. But if you're new to the business or thinking about getting in, I think it's an important foundational start to the morning. And what I'll cover in these three headlines are things that are still in play today, but it's more of the recent past. So the first one I want to talk about headline is around store performance. What has happened at the store level. And we're looking here at that top line, area line is locations, but the curvy line through that is AUV, so store revenues per year. Now, what I'm going to say, time out before I explain this slide. These next two, you might wonder, where do these store counts come from? How do I get this information? So the sources here are the Federal Reserve of St. Louis and then the US Census. And our belief is this is about as good as we can get on top line industry numbers, on locations and revenues, and from that we can extrapolate and do some fun math. What do we know about that number? Well, when Fred carves out their data, they take the NAICS code for car washing, and then they apply another layer to it, which is NAICS car washes with paid employees. So our belief is a lot of these numbers really speak mostly to the tunnel market, okay? Why? Well, typically car washes that exist at gas stations or convenience stores are categorized as gas stations. Second, a lot of self-service rollover sites oftentimes don't have employees, so they're not going to fit to that paid employee definition. In this, you might find some revenues and location numbers for detailers if they have employees. So there's a little bit of data noise, but we feel like this is a really good source, and this is the most up to date. You might wonder, why don't I have 2025 on here? It's not out yet. 2023 should be released in May, so next month should be available to us. So next year, come back and I'll tell you how things went 3 years ago, if you're interested. Okay, so the headline number one is around store performance. So what I like about this time period, 16 to 22, is I think you're seeing three things in this period of time. One is you're seeing I'll call it kind of the full adoption of the express exterior model during this time frame. Number two is you're sort of seeing the full adoption of the subscription format. And then number three is the impact of COVID. Now, it wasn't COVID itself per se that changed the car wash business, how we operate, how we design, wash cars, etc. But there is an impact on the industry, certainly, in how our segment of the economy performed during and out of COVID, and what that did to prove thesis or to prove that it was a durable and interesting place to invest. And so out of that period is when you see a lot of entry of capital into the industry. So all three things in this time period. What's interesting is, and so if you look at the top line numbers from the federal government, you'll see, well, industry revenues go up and up and up. They go up to the right, that's nice. What's important is it wasn't just industry revenues top line because of store addition. It was actually performance at the store level. So store revenues growing more than twice as fast as locations. So truly the store proposition changing during this period. Second one is now around the number of units, the number of stores. And so what you'll see is on this graph that pre-2020, year over year store growth, 16, 17, 18, 17 through 19, pardon me, in that mid 1.5%-ish level. And then look what happens out of COVID, 3 times that year over year change in new stores added. 2022, that total of 943. I think most would believe, we certainly do, that was a high watermark for the industry in terms of new locations added. Probably still is the peak of new construction. And actually, I call out too, what else you can see from this data is a operational efficiency gain. You can see that the number of employees required per store when you parse through the data actually decreased from 9.9 to 8.5, which is that gain in efficiency during the period of 16.5%. All right, so third is the story of consolidation. And so, again, now this period is 2012 through 2022 based on census data, but also I've overlaid PC&D Magazine's top 100 chains information, thanks to them. And so a common measure of concentration in an industry is called the C4 or the C10, which gives you a sense of what's the market share of the top 4 or top 10 players. And so what we can see in that march from 2012 to 2022 is that C10 growth from being roughly 3% of total tunnel locations to more than 11% of tunnel locations. Now also what's happening in this same period of time is number of locations year over year are growing at around a 2% clip. Those top 10, the C10, are growing more like a 15% clip. So you see during this period what once and had always been a very fragmented industry continue to evolve and mature and in fact accelerate during the period. Okay, so those were the headlines. Most people have heard those before. Now it's at the point where investors understand the story, business media generally understands the story, zoning and permitting people understand the story. All those things, the car wash macro is pretty well understood. So let's maybe take a minute and talk about some stories that are underneath those headlines. And so we've picked 5 of them, and these are more present day. I think I would say many of these are still being written. We're in the process of understanding how these stories will end. So let's go to those. So the first one I want to talk about is the idea of the health of the consumer. So you can't avoid stories about the consumer now, right? You can find all sorts of data on discretionary income and credit card debt and sentiment. And in fact, I guess it was just Wednesday, University of Michigan's benchmark consumer sentiment survey number, their most recent, was finalized, which is a 32% decrease. 32% decrease year over year in consumer sentiment. Big number, big change. That's a macro, right? So what can we in the car wash business, though, look at or rely upon to tell us, is any of that bleeding through to the car wash space? So here's a couple of data points that we find interesting. Tip of the cap to these folks. So the first is Bank of America has more than 50 million cardholders. and they've been producing a nice report that shows us month to month, year over year spending change in the car wash category. And so what will that show us? Because you can't make it out there, I'll tell you. So January of this year, up 28% year over year. February, up 7%. March, up 16%. So at top line spending, you can't see any of those blinking yellow lights, perhaps. Looks like a good start to the year. The other one that we'll rely upon and look at is data from Rinst. So from Rinst's 3,000 plus stores that have been open for at least a year, they will regularly provide reports like this. This will tell us that as of the most recent quarter they're reporting on, Q1 of this year, year over year store revenue up 12%. Again, and sort of in line with the Bank of America information. Seems like a nice strong start to the year for the first 3 months. Now I will say, there might be one blinking yellow light in this data, which is that voluntary churn number. So year over year voluntary churn for the quarter up 12%. So certainly one of those pieces of information we might want to pay attention to, speaking to how consumers' demand for car washing may be evolving or changing. Okay, the second story is around saturation. Now, we believe that saturation, or answering the question, are we saturated, remains on the street micro market decision. You can do all sorts of fun things with numbers and extrapolations, but it'll depend upon what that street looks like or what that corner looks like, who's around you, the condition of your competition, to know whether or not you can address some unmet demand or grow demand. But, and tip of the cap on this slide to focus, has been putting some nice data together they've been offering, looking region by region actually, and state by state on this issue of saturation. Are we saturated? And they have built a model, which I don't pretend to know every aspect of it. I believe some parts of it are undisclosed, but it takes things like population, vehicles, number of incumbents, et cetera, to come up with this idea of what could be the undeveloped capacity by state. And so I'm pulling this from their Midwestern report, which is less than 45 days old, which included as the most saturated state, Michigan, showing something like maybe only 22 sites not under development available right now, given demand and incumbents. And the one that was least saturated was the state of Wisconsin, with 95, 96 stores still available in untapped capacity, undeveloped capacity, excuse me. So, is this exactly the right number for Michigan or Wisconsin? Certainly if you live in those states, you have a very strong opinion. But we don't know, of course, but I think it's really interesting that the industry is now producing and modeling and using data to try to get to answering that question. Okay, the third story is the intentions and plans around sponsored back groups or their sponsors. And I want to thank Carwash Advisory. This slide is pulled from their year-end 2024 report, where they've taken a look at all the different sponsors that work in the industry right now, which I would estimate somewhere maybe at least 3 dozen, possibly 4 dozen, if not on a regional basis, local basis, at work in the industry today, and what their hold period has been. So Carwash Advisory has calculated or cited that the average hold period for a sponsor is about 5.8 years. And so we're getting some of the folks who have invested in the industry during this up and to the right graph that we showed earlier, this 16 to 22 period. They are getting to, and in some cases have surpassed that typical hold period. So what does that mean for the industry? Does it mean we're going to have IPOs? Does it mean we're going to have more M&A activity amongst platforms? Does it mean recapitalizations? But we don't know yet. The story is still being written, but certainly this will be an important part of the story going forward as we reach more and more of those typical exit dates, periods. Okay, the next one we'll look at, and we could have called this fourth story interest rates and the financing environment in general, but that's pretty macro. That affects every industry, every business. I think for the car wash industry, sale leaseback has been more specifically a vehicle, particularly for that teens to early 2020s period. A lot of sponsor-backed platforms We're using sale leaseback to finance growth. Well, in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen cap rates move upward, maybe a full point on average. And we've also, the story still being written is going to be how will the market, the consumers of those on the other side of us in the sale leaseback market, so we're talking REITs, we're talking 1099 investors, what will their appetite look like as the industry works through still the ZIPS reorganization, which involves some renegotiation with leaseholders? How will that change their appetite and their assessment of risk in the car wash space? And or if any other platforms perhaps enter into similar renegotiations with leaseholders on what was executed upon during the growth phase of the industry. Okay, and then finally would be the final story we're under is this idea of industry sentiment, because we're still not entirely robots. Not all decisions are made by computers. And so at the end of the day, all of you in this audience are making decisions based upon what you're seeing on the street, at your store, or in your plant. And that is informing also your expectations, which inform your decisions. And so what I've got here on the screen is the quarterly sentiment survey, an excerpt of them that we do every 3 months. And so what this will ask people is, what are your expectations for what are your expectations for year-end growth in your segment, retail or supplier? And then what's your level of optimism about conditions now and conditions in 6 months? So 2 things stand out to us in this period. One is that we are now in a 3-quarter period, 3 consecutive quarters, where both retail and supply are projecting single-digit growth. Now, still growth. No one's projecting negative retreat from top line, but we haven't in our 5 years of running the survey come across 3 consecutive quarters where both segments are forecasting mid-single digits in this case. The second thing we're seeing is, on the sentiment side, is a real change, comparative direction of retail and supplier, with 2 consecutive quarters now where retailers are feeling better about current and 6-month out prospects, but suppliers are feeling consistently worse. Okay, so a real change in course, or a change in assessment, I should say, of both of those segments. Okay, so those are 3 headlines and 5 stories. If I give you any more, it's just too much to process. So, to help us with that, we have some great individuals I'm going to invite to the stage to help us process through all this, not limited to this data, but to use this to inform our conversations. So if you'd allow me to, I'd like to introduce them one by one. First, after a career in marketing at Best Buy and Dairy Queen and General Mills, Jessica Zazworsky opened Bubble Bath car washes in the Minnesota market and now has 2 stores that she opened, the first one in 2020. And so please welcome to the stage Jessica Zazworsky. Did I say Bubble Bath? I did. It's Bubble Barn.
Bubble Barn.
It's Bubble Barn.
Close.
My apologies. The second speaker we have joining us from the front row here is Pete Nani. After Pete's career at Wash Depot and Mr. Car Wash, he was appointed the CEO recently of the Circle K portfolio of independent stores. Please welcome Pete Nani. And then last but not least, please welcome to the stage, with a career of more than 10 years at National Carwash Solutions and now since 2022 their CEO, Jesse Wurth. Well, how about that? How about that? All right, so we've got some questions we've prepared for a little bit. I'm going to give everybody a chance to react to some of what we've seen and give their own impressions. And then when we get to Q&A in a few minutes, we'll have these folks largely be our responders. But the first is I want to start with, and maybe we'll start ladies first if you don't mind, is around, let's go all the way back to where we started on stories on the consumer, the health of the consumer. Mm-hmm. So you can read headlines, and then you can look at your own till. You can know how you're doing. And then also, especially for you, Jessica, you're talking to customers all the time. You're getting a really great sense, or your managers are. So what are you seeing that maybe should inform our understanding of consumers today?
Well, I was thinking about this as I was, preparing for today, and, what I find is the things that were important in 2021 are still important, right? Providing a great value, a great product, friendly service. I mean, that's what people are looking for. I just think in today's environment, those messages are even more important. We're also trying different things, right? Maybe in a different environment back in 2021, I was willing to take bigger swings, bigger risks. Now I'm trying to get those singles and those doubles that can eventually grow the business, but we're just continually trying to test new things and bring the business along. So what messages are really resonating with consumers? It's obviously value. We talk to our customers and they're canceling memberships. We saw the churn. I'm just reevaluating, my finances right now, and it doesn't fit in. So making sure people understand, we're talking about, we watch the news, we're talking about tariffs. Cars are going to be more expensive. Let's make sure that we're taking care of our vehicles that we have today, right? So what's going to resonate with the customers, and we'll do a little more of that, right? So that's kind of how I'm approaching things today.
Great. Pete, more of a multi-region portfolio you're managing. So what are you seeing from the street on consumers?
Same thing. Customers are really looking for value. There's a lot of competition out there. Some would say markets are saturated, right? So bringing that value, differentiating yourself, investing in your team, investing in your stores, making sure those stores are clean and operational. We measure uptime. That's huge. And we can give you a quick, Netflix story. You turn on Netflix and it says, not available right now. Okay, I'll watch Prime. You come back the next day and Netflix still not available, you're probably gonna cancel your subscription, right? So that uptime ratio is really important for us. We use it for training purposes as well. Regarding tariffs, I think consumers they're unaware of what's going to happen. We all are unaware of what's going to happen with tariffs, but there's that fear of the unknown that has some people pulling back. That may be why that churn looks that way. Because we have had a good quarter pretty much across the United States for weather.
Jesse, you're kind of next order on the supplier side from the consumer demand part of it, but obviously you're a part of that chain, that reaction. So what are you seeing and hearing across the country?
Yeah, I think there's been you saw the revenue data from Q4 of last year and Q1 of this year, so there's a lot of really good momentum, but there is a little bit of an overhang, what Pete and Jessica were saying about the consumer and the confidence. But you are starting to see more, and you saw it on the retailers being optimistic and starting to do more investments. We're starting to see, where new builds this year and last year were down from that 900 that you had shown. You're starting to see a lot more investment in the stores because for that very thing, if something new down the street is taking some of those members, some of that retail, you've got to raise your game up, and you're seeing a significant amount of refreshing and renewing happening in the space today that you didn't quite see 2 and 3 years ago. And just a recognition that whatever your brand and brand standard is, keeping it consistent at all your locations is super critical to keeping that customer happy.
Maybe this would fit into your viewpoint well, Jesse, so we don't have the 23, 24, 25 data. What do you think that'll look like as that data becomes available? Do you have a sense of where perhaps those numbers were for those years unreported? And then what are you seeing suppliers do, having done during that period, to respond to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, if you go back to 22 and 23, those were the high water marks. Varying degrees of numbers, but if 900, 800 is kind of a right peak. Last year, Mr. Car Wash had their earnings report. I think John mentioned about 550 of units, and we don't have a very different number than that. So about a 30% drop last year in new unit growth. This year, what we're hearing is we'll be down again on new units. Again, there's a range of opinions. Ours is kind of in that 15 to 20% down range, so maybe in the mid to upper 400s. On the new build side, but where you're seeing is, I think if you got to pull the lens back a little bit and look at a longer view of builds that have happened over the last 5 years. And I think if you really look at in 5 years from now, the decade of the 2020s, and you draw a linear chart, I think the new unit growth will be a healthy line. I think it's just normalizing a little bit, but it's now the investment that's happening at the stores to drive more revenue growth. So to get the industry's total, the retail TAM, if that's a $15 billion number today, how do you get that to grow? Well, new units is one way, but getting more consumption at the existing stores is another lever. Price is another lever. So there's other ways to get that growth.
So new store additions tapering off, maybe a healthier go-forward growth rate. But still we've added then, in a look back of 5 to 10 years, thousands and thousands of stores, right, stack up new to the industry. So let's talk about saturation a little bit and where the place is for independents or new people who want to crack into the market. And Jessica, let's talk about your view of things. I mean, having done that not long ago, where do you think the place is, the opportunity is? How much different is the risk profile for getting in now? And is it a viable option?
I mean, there's always opportunity for new investors to come in and growth. I've only been doing this for 5 years, so it's hard for me to say, like 20 years ago, what did it look like? But it's tough. When I opened my first wash, we didn't have national players really in the market. They have a different risk profile and different buying power than I have as a small independent. So, purchasing real estate, you're competing for those A sites, and that is difficult. So you have to make sure that you're really tapped into your local community to understand, what are the opportunities that I have, because I live here and I know people and I'm in the community talking, and where can I go that's maybe a half a step ahead in terms of development, and I'll be there ready and waiting as those communities grow around me. So I would say that that's been the piece that's been the most challenging, is finding those great sites at a price that I feel like I can make my business work, be healthy, grow, provide, for me and my team. Other than that, I think local businesses are the backbone of this country, right? Small businesses, and that's something that we talk about a lot at the Bubble Barn, both for our customers and our employees. Like in Minnesota, it's very important to us to support small businesses. I think that's probably true across the country. So I make sure I show my face at my washes a lot so that people know that, you're talking to the owner, right? This is a personal touch that you're getting that maybe you wouldn't get at a larger national chain. They, know my story. I shake people's hands. And then we talk about that for our employees too. There are different benefits. We can treat everyone at a small company like an individual versus having, a larger company where you have to have more systems in place, right? And, even I have a gentleman that works for me. He's starting his own lawn care business. He does that on the side, and we talk a lot about, well, this is how I started my business. How can you grow your business? So those type of opportunities, I hope, make it worthwhile for my team. So that's how we're trying to differentiate ourselves in the market and a bunch of national players.
Thank you, Pete. You've been around for a while, not too long, but just the right amount of time probably. And you've been at different organizations, seen different parts of the country for years. How do you think about this idea of saturation and where opportunities are? And maybe I'll just add a little piece is, probably if it was 2 years ago, we're sitting here talking about building that competitive moat, right? Everyone's building a moat. And then I think we might have realized that it's tougher to build a moat and keep that moat in existence operationally than maybe some organizations' thoughts. Not everyone has executed upon that grand idea. So what has that done for the competitive landscape and how you look at the opportunity for people who want to get in or grow?
So I completely agree with what Jessica said. And yes, areas are saturated, but this is still a fantastic industry in any part of the country to get into, whether you're independent or large, okay? The difference is, a couple of years ago, there were people that were building chains of car washes with no intention of operating them, right? It was a kind of a build and flip. Guys, those days are gone for probably the next 5 years. And again, this is my opinion. So the better operators now have shored up their operations, kind of built that moat, bookended some of their competitors, and really concentrated on building out regions. So I think in the future, you're going to see some larger operators that give up certain regions where they're not the 1, 2, or 3 player, right? Because it is going to be harder, but there's definitely a spot for everybody. Independent, large, it's a great industry.
Jesse, what are you seeing from the clients you work with? It's a capital deployment question, right? To buy, to build, or improve the existing stores you have for growth. So what are you seeing?
I think that the need of the thread is to do all. So how do you make that all happen? And just to add what Pete had said, there's starting to become a trend of this market, and do I want to be in this market? And so you're going to see a bit of that trading starting to go on. There's also this amount of renovation work that has to happen as well. But as far as also the amount of growth that can still happen in the industry, it is still immense. When we had done some work around, and ICA publishes the data around how many vehicles getting professionally washed that have changed over the years, and it kind of got into that 70s range. And so if you think about the amount of professional washed vehicles, if it can get from 75 to 85%, and then member can get from low double digits to twice that amount, the amount of new builds is pretty substantial. And as that happens over the next 5, 10, 20 years, it provides for an ample amount of growth. But getting these markets squared up and being, to Pete's point, operating with excellence in those markets and getting the network effect and the density effect in those markets is super critical. Because it's tough to get scale nationally. You have to have a lot of locations that truly have scale nationally. It's still a pretty regional game.
Adding on to something Pete said, and I don't know how much this is happening nationally, but certainly in our market, I think with the cities, the municipalities, there's still education about the service we're providing too. We have a housing issue in Minnesota. They're focused on building, affordable housing, but amenities need to come with that. And I'm still having conversations about this is something that the community needs. And I think there's opportunity there as the cities come along and understand, okay, we built this housing, now we need services for the folks that live there. And I think there's a ton of opportunity as that comes to light. And I have to imagine that that's happening throughout the country, for sure.
Yeah, competition isn't the only constrictor plate, right, on growth. And I've heard that referred to by some people as the social license. Right, the social license under which we operate. And so this idea of moratoriums, do any of you think that that's maybe an underappreciated challenge that will continue?
Definitely a challenge that we need to be more educated on, to be prepared. And through the ICA, that's probably a great place to start, right? As we gather data from different municipalities that are challenging locations, that maybe we can help the members with that.
Jesse, any thoughts on that?
I think just echoing what the group has set up here.
Okay. Let me pick on you again, though, if you don't mind, because you're kind of the data guy. So I blitzed a whole bunch of stuff on the screens earlier. I'm curious about what data maybe you're relying on more than others. What other data we didn't talk about thus far that you think are sort of today's metrics that might be important? And just pick on you. I've only heard TAM mentioned once on this stage thus far.
Yeah.
And if this was 3 years ago, everybody's answers would have TAM in them.
Yeah.
So I just think it reflects a change in the industry, right? And a different focus. So on data, what are you looking at? What do you think are the more important metrics today?
Yeah, and as we've discussed, from an industry standpoint, there's you shared a lot with this group today. It's still, as an industry, we lack really good, clean data. True, really collaborative data that we can all contribute into some, anonymous site and come back with the true. The fact that we're guessing how many new units have been built over the last 3 years within not a great degree of certainty it's just not the same as other industries. And so I would encourage, as an association, and as associates and members let's find a way to drive more clean data so we can all make great decisions. Because the key to data is, one, to capture it, and then capture it in a way that you can analyze it, and then analyze it in a way that you can action it and truly drive the performance that you're looking for and hit those, hit your numbers or hit the operational metrics or hit your uptimes, whatever all those things are. And there's going to be if you go around the show today, the amount of technology that's being introduced into the space to gather that data is super critical. At the end of the day, to run our supply side of the business is just staying close to customers. It's understanding what they're up to, what their needs are, where their pain points are, and where we can be, as well as delivering some goods and services on where the industry is going to capture when the puck, chasing where the puck's going to be.
Yeah. Pete, I'm curious, does your dashboard look different today than it did 2 or 3 years ago? What's more or less important in terms of data?
Absolutely does. Let's just talk about technology for a second, right? Yeah. So in our industry exploded, whether you like it or not. Private equity's entrance into this industry really helped bring this to the forefront of the consumer. And the education has now reached a tipping point where we're all hopefully feeling pretty good about the industry, right? And what's happened there is that void of knowledge got created. And it's being fulfilled right now with technology. It's being fulfilled with training platforms like the LEAD program, okay? We stood up a training platform at True Blue. It was a couple $100,000. There's probably not too many chains with 20 stores that can do that. But the LEAD program and other training programs give them that same benefit. We actually incorporated some of the LEAD modules into our training program. And we have about 75 modules. But that's been the void. And then so now companies like NCS and Sonny's and other companies that are bringing technology in are really helping us monitor that. So 3 years ago, no, I wasn't monitoring how many water softeners across the chain were working, but now I am, right? We have vibration sensors on vacuums now that will tell you if the bearings are going bad, or if they're heating up or the bearings are vibrating. So I expect that technology to continue and then into preventative maintenance, right? And all the things which I should kick back over to Jesse and let him talk about. But those are the things now on our dashboard, aside from the car counts, the revenue, the member conversion, different things that we're already used to looking at.
Great. So, Jessica, I'll kick that to you. Whether it's different data on the dashboard or different technologies, how does your world look different maybe from just a few ago?
Well, I think certainly with so many new units and stores being built, I mean, we all know the environment is incredibly hard on the equipment, right? And you're going to see everything kind of aging out at the same time. Multiply that concern by it's all of a sudden a lot more expensive to replace equipment potentially. So preventative maintenance and getting really tight on that service end is so important in this environment, making sure that equipment is getting its maximum lifespan. We spend a lot of time talking about, okay, what are we seeing? What are we worried about? How can we get better on our maintenance? That's something that we spend time with managers talking about every single week, and how can technology help us? In this environment also, it's leaning into the community. Those that have been here a long time know how helpful the car wash community can be and how focused it is on sharing. So go out, meet people today, create your community across the country. What are you seeing? In California, how does that apply to Minnesota? And then use the ICA. We do, the data is challenging. I mean, you mentioned I come from backgrounds where we had, grocery store data, and we just would pull that and we knew exactly what was happening with us and our competitors, and I would love to see us get there someday. But especially as an independent, it's a lot about, feeling. And so how can you, take your feelings and then back it up with what you are hearing from an industry as a whole, and the ICA is such a great tool for that, leaning into that. And then technology is advancing so rapidly. We were talking with, when we were preparing for this, Pete and I were asking Jesse about, AI, what do you see at NCS? Because, vendors are going to be on the lead of that, and then how do we make sure that, you're coming in at the right moment, right, where it can really affect your business in a positive way. I don't know if Jesse wants to speak to that at all.
Well, the technology's advancing at an expedited rate, and it's both revenue growth and cost, not just cost reduction, but cost awareness. And so then you know what to do with this. So to Pete's point, why wouldn't I want to know when my conveyor is going to go down? Why wouldn't I want predictive failure of anything that I have? Why wouldn't I want to extend the life of my equipment? Right? The answer is yes, and the reality is, you walk around the show floor and there's multiple folks that are offering it. It exists today. A lot of what Pete mentioned, it is alive and available today, so I encourage you guys to get educated on it, because that is that's a very important thing around this operational excellence and maintaining quality and giving your consumer what they expect every single time.
Maybe to shift off of just numbers and tech for a moment, let's talk about people, because what's also important is what's happening behaviorally in the industry. So Jesse, maybe I'll go back to you to start us, is what are you seeing in that cultural, behavioral, what the best organizations, maybe the ones that you admire, what are they doing in that realm with people and prioritizations? What's changed and how are they successful?
So I guess I could share more of a trend. So when we go visit operators, again, of any size, can be a smaller chain, a medium-sized chain, a larger chain, it has been so impressive over the last 2-3 years of that journey to see organizations invest in things like chief marketing officers, data scientists. You just didn't see these titles in companies of whatever size in the past, and now they want to be more self-sufficient. They want to drive, take that data that we collected and capture it in a way and analyze it and do something with it. They want to take control of that. And so I think the piece that, for me, that's been interesting is to see the titles that are showing up in these quarterly business reviews or top-to-tops that we have. That's been the most interesting piece, and those that have leaned into those positions earlier are seeing the benefits of it. And these are 10Xers in their organization. They take it kind of from it's in the dark, we're not sure what to do with it, we'll just do today what we did tomorrow, and it's just changing their organizations.
Jessica, you're newer to it, duration in the industry, but you're also close to your culture every day. And you really benefited, it sounds like, from that community that still exists out there, right, of helping one another. So what are you, when you look at, again, the leaders, the companies you might want to be like, not that you're not already there, right? But talk about behavioral, cultural, and how that might be changing and evolving for your company.
Right. I think, what I see from companies that I admire, both in the industry and outside, is just consistency, right? Clear, consistent messages. And it's really, I think in this environment, a lot around the employees. We have kind of a new generation of employees coming in the market. They need different things to motivate them, and it's understanding that. We, definitely in the last year, I remember last summer just going through this challenge with our team, and I'm like, how do I motivate these kids? Like I had someone telling me, I don't feel like this uniform represents me, and I'm like, I don't care. Represents me and the brand, right? And so spending time understanding how, as we have a new generation entering the workforce, how we maximize their potential. And it was a learning curve for me. It was a learning curve for my managers, and we spent time, researching that and trying different things. And we have a great team now, I think, because we've invested in trying to understand that. But in this environment, as well as I guess at any point in time, it's understanding those leading signals and not letting anything go too far before you're addressing it, right? We were having some signals saying, okay, you're having challenges relating. How do we address that now before we have everyone, run off on us and we're not getting good employees in here and we have a terrible reputation in the community. So it's just really paying attention to that. And that's, as an independent, that's on you as the owner, but then also trusting, your managers to be open and honest with you about what's going on culture-wise, because you can't be there all the time, right?
And then Pete, you're leading a multi-region organization. So where does culture, behavior fit into your priorities, and how have you seen that shifting?
It is probably the most important thing in our company. So we start with a paradigm shift, day one. Every interview, we are, and these guys in the audience can recite it, we are a people development company that happens to wash cars. Okay? That's in the interview, right? You thought you were coming to work for a car wash company. Mm-hmm. We have a formalized training program and a formalized career path. This can be so much more. We are a great company. And by doing that, we have been able to build great teams. And then, to Jessica's point, we empower people. We let them make decisions. Our general managers are empowered. They belong to the local Chamber of Commerce. We recommend that they go and do the breakfast meeting so they can get some public speaking experience. And we, through that, we have just built great teams, and we allow them to build people below them. And we talk about, the ability to move up in the company. Well, you need the desire, and you need somebody to take your spot. And offering up the next level of talent by developing people is really what you're judged on.
We're going to take some questions after this next, questions from the audience after this next question for the panel. So if you have one, go ahead and raise your hand now, and our mic runners will come around to you. What I'd like to ask each of you just quickly to do is, if you were advising someone, hey, what should I focus on the next 3 to 5 years at the most? What are one or two things that a question I should be asking my organization, or an area of focus? If it could be one or two, what would that answer be? What would your advice be, Jessica?
For me, it's getting really tight on my business fundamentals, making sure that my costs are under control. Do we like what's happening with labor? My vendors, do I have good vendors? Do I feel good about them? Is their pricing competitive? What value are they providing? I'm reviewing all of that, and you should be doing it always, but it's particularly important in this environment.
Pete?
Two quick things. One, operational excellence, so NPS scores, right? Would you recommend me to a friend or family member? And the second thing is, we have this great industry, and I've been in this industry a very long time, so I really can't talk about other industries, but reach out and make friends within the industry. We share information with each other. We're happy to share information with each other. Not necessarily the competitor in your backyard, but there are plenty of people that meet them at the trade shows, build relationships, and have conversations every quarter. Build out your network.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, I think all I'd add to that is around organizations that are going to lean into automation and AI, which is it's a big buzzword, and what does it all apply to? But your team should be spending a significant amount of time on what does automation and AI mean for me? What are we doing with it? And how can we do more with it? And how do I learn what everybody else is doing and then some, whether it's in this industry or how others are applying that across their networks?
All right. Thank you. Will you stick around for questions? You're okay?
Just the easy ones.
Sweating too bad? You're doing great, all of you. Okay. Let's see. Where are my mic runners? Ben.
Morning. Took a lot of good notes. Jesse, you talked on something that I thought was potentially a blinking yellow light, to your point, that was AI, but I went with something different. I'm going to read it. It's a little bit wordy. Sorry about that. But with what we saw with consumer and manufacturing sentiment trending down, voluntary churn ticking up, and then there's economic pressures that are looming that we're unsure of. One of the brighter blinking lights, in my opinion, is demographics, particularly Gen Z, with their limited financial spending power. The boomers already halfway retired and then going on fixed incomes. How's that going to reshape consumer behavior as well as car wash ownership behavior over the next 3 to 5 years? Should demographics be the backdrop of all data that we pull from here on out?
That was a lot.
I will reread it. Like
That
I
one's on
said,
you,
I took a
Jesse.
lot of notes.
You did warn it.
That's right. Good you read that one.
Maybe I'll let Pete and Jessica take the consumer piece of it.
I've seen my mix change over time, certainly trending towards more of that value wash. So again, it goes back to training to help your team understand how to communicate what the value is and paying a little bit more, and making sure we're bringing forth those messages in a consistent way that's easy to digest for the consumer. And so that's something we're seeing. But I still think I live in Minnesota, so we got to wash our cars. I mean, there's a lot of salt and such on the street. So everyone needs a car wash. I don't think that that's going away anytime soon, no matter what people's income level is. It's just, frequency and wash level. So again, it's about communicating value of washing your car and why you want to do that, value of the unlimited membership, and value of the different, why we have those different wash packages. And so that goes down to what is your communication strategy and what is your training plan for that.
Pete, anything to add there on demographics or stratas of customers?
Except the younger demographics that you're talking about, they're growing up seeing car washes all over,
yeah.
and it's part of the DNA of America now. So I think that while they might not be buying the top package or jumping into a membership on their first visit, I think they're acclimated to washing their car and educated.
I do have a quick follow-up. As the boomers are the largest working cohort about to exit the market, it skips Gen X, then goes to millennials, and then we're 25 years out from the next largest cohort because it's our kids who become that workforce. Are you guys worried at all about labor in the future and the increasing cost of that as well?
From an operator's perspective, I'm not really worried about labor. There's going to be continual improvements in technology that will help us become more efficient. And the professionalism of our industry has just skyrocketed over the last 10 years. And people can see themselves in our industry, making a great living without having to go to college and get a 4-year degree. That's one thing we should be talking about, is the value of higher education now, because I think that's more on the mind of that generation right now. They're anxious to get out there and start making a living.
Mm-hmm.
Brave front row question. Here
Morning.
we go.
Are we working? There we go. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. It was very useful information. My question's for Jessica. When you started your presentation, you talked about these new ideas, things that you were trying. You were a little bit more aggressive before, but now you're satisfied with singles and doubles. Can you share some of the things that you've tried and some of the new ideas that you're...
Yeah, well, I mean, when I first opened my first wash, things like, geofence marketing, that was just becoming accessible to independents, right? There were organizations out there helping you do that, and that was transformative for my business. And I was really willing to invest in that. There was, you saw those charts that Eric showed earlier where, everyone's store revenue is up. There's just it's like cash everywhere. It's amazing. And so I was really willing to invest in bigger ticket items that were maybe a little riskier, right? Now I have some of those fundamentals in place. I'm thinking about, how do we tweak messaging? How do I use my local community more? How do I partner with the Chamber of Commerce? Those types of things that maybe don't feel as transformative, but build the foundation for the future. And certainly while I am here, and I come every year to the show, what's new on the scene and what can we invest in? For me this year, the thing that we're focusing on is training. We've been doing it on our own. I think we're quickly outgrowing that. And like with the LEAD program, there are ways to do that in a lot more cost-effective way that makes it accessible to smaller operators like me. Like Pete said, they're incredibly expensive to stand up on their own. How can we leverage economies of scale to really bring that benefit that a larger company has to our smaller business?
We're gonna go to speed round in the last couple of minutes we've got here. So you all jump in. Whoever wants it, grabs it first. Mm-hmm. Next question. Ben, in the back? No. You're pointing at each other. Oh, okay.
Hi, thanks. Jesse, you mentioned that you thought there would be like in the 400s of new build in the upcoming year. Do you think that's a new stabilized level, given where we came from prior to COVID? I think it was about the similar levels, or do you think there's like going to be a change in how operators view either consolidation via M&A, or there will be a kind of comeback to new development in the upcoming years?
The larger data set that we pulled a few years ago would support a much higher growth rate. I think what we're seeing today, or at least from our view, is just a bit of a change in the market from a lot of new build and then M&A, and now, to Pete's point, operating and digesting a bit of what we have. So I don't think getting hung on the 400 number is I think it's an outcome of some of the building, and then some of that growth that came in 22 and 23, those same chains are not building new, but investing heavily in their base. And so this small little window of time that we're going through is transformative in what's happening. But over time, our belief is it'll run at a higher rate than in the fours.
And just a quick caveat on that, to add to what Jesse said, with saturation becoming an issue, and economics are what they are right now, I think the threshold has been moved on ROI, where people are being much more considerate before they jump in and build 5.
Last question, sir.
Hi, wonderful to hear you guys talk today. So we talk a lot about the future and development, and I'm just wondering what kind of anticipations you guys have for large-scale adjustments where, I've been in the industry for about half a decade, and we have pieces of equipment and technology that is a quick plug-in and apply, but what kind of changes you see where conveyor or tunnel structure or things like that where you can handle a larger renovation without having to sacrifice that guest lost or service loss.
Is your question specifically around downtime for renovation?
Yeah, so how can you handle just a larger change in the industry to make yourself more efficient with any sort of technology with your servers or the way you capture data on site to run it more fluidly and more efficiently without having to sacrifice closing a location down or completely tearing down a building to fit in that new structure?
Yeah, I think from a technology standpoint, there's a lot of solutions in the market today that you can apply without taking the tunnel down. So what Pete had mentioned before about monitoring water treatment or monitoring the conveyor or monitoring the vacuum producer, all of those things can be done today with very minimal or no downtime, and you can get a substantial lift from it. There are new technologies coming out that would require some level of, whether it's overnight work or very short windowed downtime, to put in new products, but overall, it's top of mind for the OEMs on how to shorten windows and not have sites not operational.